She was 7 months pregnant when her mother-in-law poured a bucket of cold water on her while she slept. Not by accident. Not out of confusion. With full intention, standing over her at 6 in the morning while her son was deployed 8,000 miles away, watching her gasp awake, clutching her stomach, soaking wet, shaking, and then saying, calmly, like she was commenting on the weather, "You sleep too much. Get up and make breakfast." That was a Tuesday. By Friday, Camille had lost 4 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. Welcome to Hill Tales Stories, my wonderful family. I'm truly grateful to have you here. If you're new, comment below with your time and where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to become part of our growing family. Camille Reyes had never been the kind of woman who asked for help easily. She grew up watching her mother work double shifts at a laundry facility in Fayetteville, North Carolina, folding other people's clean clothes with rough, cracked hands while raising 2 daughters on her own. She learned early that complaining didn't change anything. You kept moving. You carried what you had to carry. She was 26 when she met Marcus Okafor at a mutual friend's cookout. Tall, quiet, with a laugh that took a moment to arrive but stayed long when it did. He was Army, 3rd generation. His grandfather had served in Korea, his father in Desert Storm, and Marcus had followed without ever really questioning whether he would. It was simply what the men in his family did. They dated for 2 years. He was honest from the start. Military life meant deployments, distance, missed anniversaries, missed birthdays. Camille said she understood. She thought she did. What she didn't account for was Dolores. Marcus's mother, Dolores Okafor, was 61 years old and had lived in the same house in Raleigh for 32 years. She was small, barely 5'2", with silver-streaked hair she kept pulled tight, and eyes that always seemed to be measuring you against something you'd already failed to be. She had raised Marcus mostly alone after his father's second deployment turned permanent. He'd found someone else overseas and never really came back to the marriage. Dolores had never fully forgiven that. She had transferred all of it, every ounce of unspoken resentment and swallowed grief, into becoming indispensable to her son. When Marcus told her he and Camille were getting married, Dolores smiled and said, "She seems sweet." The word sweet sounded like a verdict. The wedding was small, 40 people, a park pavilion, late August heat. Camille wore her mother's pearl earrings. Marcus cried when he saw her, which surprised him more than it surprised anyone else. Dolores sat in the front row in a cream-colored dress that several guests quietly noted was a shade too close to white. She said it was an accident. Maybe it was. For the first year, they lived 30 minutes from Dolores, close enough for Sunday dinners, far enough for breathing room. Marcus was stateside, training cycles, but no deployment. Those 12 months were the good ones. Camille would look back on them later and realize she hadn't understood at the time how good they were. Then the orders came. Marcus was deployed to a forward operating base in a region he couldn't name in his letters. 18 months, possibly longer depending on operational needs. And with him gone, the apartment they rented felt suddenly expensive, and the neighborhood suddenly less safe, and Camille was pregnant. 6 weeks along when he shipped out, barely showing, nauseous every morning and trying to hide it at her job at the county records office so they wouldn't start treating her differently. It was Dolores who offered the solution. "You shouldn't be alone," she said over the phone, her voice measured, almost warm. "I have the space. You'd have your own room. You wouldn't have to worry about rent. And when the baby comes, I'd be right there to help." She paused. "Marcus would want you to be taken care of." Camille hesitated. Her mother offered to let her move back home. Smaller town, farther from Camille's job, but safe and familiar. Her sister said stay put, find a roommate. Camille's best friend, Yolanda, told her flat out, "Do not move in with that woman." But Camille was tired. She was scared. She missed Marcus so much it felt physical, like a pulled muscle that never healed. And there was something in her that still wanted to believe in the version of Dolores who smiled at the wedding and called her daughter that one time at Christmas. She moved in on a Saturday in early November, with 2 carloads of boxes and her cat, a gray tabby named Rescue. Dolores met her at the door, surveyed the boxes with a tight expression, and said, "You have a lot of things." By the first week, Camille noticed the rules. They were never written down. They were never announced. They were simply enforced, retroactively, as violations. The kitchen was used between 6 and 8 in the morning, and 5 and 7 in the evening. The rest of the time it was Dolores's space, and she would mention, pleasantly the first few times, that Camille had left a cup in the sink, or had used the wrong burner, or had put something back in the wrong cabinet. Camille adapted. She started keeping crackers and fruit in her room for when the pregnancy hunger hit at odd hours. The living room television was Dolores's domain after 7 p.m. Camille understood this. Mostly. What she didn't understand was why Dolores would turn up the volume on her programs to a level Camille could hear clearly through the wall of her room while she tried to sleep. Rescue was not allowed on the furniture. This was stated clearly, the one explicit rule. Camille kept the cat in her room. Dolores would still knock on her door occasionally to report that she had heard the cat on the hallway floor, or had seen cat hair near the stairs, or simply felt that animals shouldn't be inside at all, and she was reconsidering the arrangement. Marcus called when he could, brief, sometimes staticky, conversations on a satellite connection that felt like reaching through water. Camille never told him about the rules. She didn't want him worried. She told herself it was temporary adjustment. 2 women learning to share a house. Nothing more. She believed that for about 6 weeks. What would you do in her position? How long would you try to make it work before admitting something was genuinely wrong? It changed at the 16-week mark, when Camille came home from a prenatal appointment with news that the baby was healthy and growing, and made the mistake of being visibly happy about it in Dolores's kitchen. She set her appointment papers on the counter while she reached for a glass of water, smiling at nothing in particular. Just that quiet gladness you feel when the doctors confirm your baby's heartbeat is strong. Dolores looked at the papers, then looked at Camille. "You're not going to gain too much weight, are you?" she said. "Marcus likes you thin." It was such a specific cruelty, so targeted, so casual, that Camille stood there for a full 3 seconds before she could process it. She said something neutral, like "The doctor says I'm right on track," and took her glass to her room. She called Yolanda that night and for the first time admitted things weren't going well. "Come home," Yolanda said. "I can't just leave," Camille said. "She's Marcus's mother. If I leave, what does that say?" "It says you have sense," Yolanda said. "Come home." Camille stayed. That decision, made out of loyalty, out of not wanting to cause problems, out of a genuine belief that she could endure something temporary, would define the next 11 weeks. Dolores's behavior followed no pattern Camille could predict. Some days she was almost pleasant, would ask about the pregnancy, offer to make tea, talk about Marcus as a child in ways that were actually touching. Those days were disorienting in their own way, because they made Camille doubt herself. Maybe I'm imagining the other days. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. I'm hormonal. I'm scared. I'm lonely. Maybe she's fine and I'm the problem. Then there were the other days. The cold water incident happened at 28 weeks. A Tuesday morning, before dawn fully came in, Dolores standing over her with an empty bucket, telling her she slept too much and needed to make breakfast. Camille sat up, shaking, her heart slamming against her ribs, one hand pressed to her belly. The baby moved. A hard, startled kick that under other circumstances she would have smiled at. She looked at Dolores, who had already set the bucket down and was turning toward the door. "There's a doctor's note," Camille said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "From my OB. She said I need rest." She said, "Doctors pamper women too much now," Dolores said. "My generation carried babies and kept working. You'll be fine." And she left. Camille sat in her wet bedding for a long time. Then she got up and changed, stripped the sheets, put them in the washer and went to make breakfast. Because she didn't know what else to do. She was afraid to call Marcus with this. His unit was in the middle of something. She could feel it in the shorter calls, the longer silences, the way he'd say everything's okay in a voice that told her it wasn't entirely. She couldn't add this to whatever he was carrying. She called her mother instead. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was rare. Then she said, "Camille, I need you to understand something. What you just described is not a difficult mother-in-law. That is someone hurting you while pregnant. Come home." "She hasn't hit me," Camille said. "She threw cold water on a 7-month pregnant woman in her sleep," her mother said. "I'm coming to get you. Mom, I'm coming Saturday." Camille did something that week that she hadn't done before. She started writing things down. Not in a journal exactly, more like a record. Dates, times, what happened, what was said. The cold water, yes, but also the food. She realized she'd been eating less not just because of the kitchen schedule, but because Dolores had started cooking in ways that Camille was pretty sure were deliberate. Heavily spiced dishes when Camille's stomach couldn't handle it. Cooking at the last possible minute of the allowed window so Camille would miss it if she was tired. Occasionally claiming she had cooked when she hadn't. So when Camille went looking for what she'd been promised, there was nothing there. She documented the time Dolores had called Marcus. Camille had walked in mid-conversation and told him that Camille was struggling to adjust and a little emotional, framing Camille's discomfort as her own instability. She documented the time Dolores threw away a package that Camille's mother had mailed, prenatal vitamins and a soft blanket for the baby, claiming she'd thought it was junk. She documented the night Dolores had gone into Camille's room while she slept. Camille had heard her, had lain still and feigned sleep, too uncertain of what to do, and come back out with nothing. She didn't know what Dolores had been looking for. She didn't know if something had been taken. That one was the worst because it meant the room wasn't even safe. Have you ever tried to make sense of someone who was hurting you quietly enough that you couldn't quite prove it? That's the part nobody talks about. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's the slow erosion of eating just a little less, sleeping just a little worse, shrinking just a little smaller every week, until you can't remember the size you used to be. Her mother, Loretta, arrived Saturday afternoon with her sister, Deja. Nobody had planned on Deja coming, but Deja had heard the situation and decided she wasn't staying home. They pulled up in Loretta's Chevy, and Camille was on the porch waiting for them. And when she saw her mother's face, she started crying before she could help it. Dolores came to the door. The two women looked at each other across the threshold the way that two women sometimes look at each other when they both know exactly what has been happening and neither one is going to say it plainly. Not yet. "Thank you for looking after my daughter," Loretta said. Her voice was controlled, kind, even. She'd made a decision about how this was going to go. "Of course," Dolores said. "She's family." They had coffee. It was almost completely civil. Dolores performed hospitality beautifully, refilling cups without asking after Loretta's drive, complimenting the blanket Loretta had sent and claiming she'd been holding it for Camille as a surprise. Camille sat and watched and thought, this is how she survives. She's good at this. After Dolores excused herself to the kitchen, Loretta looked at Camille and said quietly, "How fast can you pack?" "I packed last night," Camille said. Deja stood up. "I'll get the bags." They were on the road to Fayetteville 2 hours later. Camille thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. She thought wrong because she didn't yet understand how much Dolores had worked on Marcus. Over the preceding 11 weeks, in their calls, Dolores had been building a narrative. Small things at first, Camille seemed sad, I worry about her emotional state, and then larger things. She'd suggested, gently, that Camille might be finding the pregnancy harder than she'd admitted, that she'd seemed withdrawn, that she'd been crying and not telling anyone why. She had, in that careful way of hers, planted the idea that Camille might not be managing well. Not a lie exactly, because Camille had been struggling, but stripped of its cause, stripped of the bucket of cold water, stripped of the missing food, stripped of the nights of disturbed sleep. Just, "Your wife is not doing well, and I don't know why." So when Camille called Marcus to tell him she'd moved to her mother's, his first response was not what happened. It was, "Did something happen with you and my mom?" That sentence landed in Camille's chest like a stone. She told him, all of it. The notes she'd been keeping, she read from them. The cold water, the food, the room, the package, all of it. He was quiet for a long time. "Camille," he finally said, "my mom wouldn't do that." And there it was. Not, "I believe you, my mom wouldn't do that." He didn't call her a liar. He didn't dismiss it entirely. But there was something in his voice, a waver of uncertainty that lived exactly where full belief should have been, and Camille heard it and understood for the first time that she was not just dealing with Dolores. She was dealing with a woman who had been preparing this defense for months. She ended the call. She sat in her childhood bedroom with her hands on her stomach and made a quiet promise to her child. "I will not be undone by this. Not for your sake." She did 3 things in the following weeks. First, she found a lawyer. Not because she thought she needed one immediately, but because she wanted to understand her situation clearly, what rights she had, what documentation meant, what options existed if things got worse. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Holbrook who specialized in family law and had clearly heard everything, listened to Camille's notes and said, "Keep documenting. Keep every record. If this escalates after the baby is born, you want a paper trail." Second, she contacted the family readiness officer assigned to Marcus's unit, a resource for military families she hadn't previously used. She didn't make accusations. She told the officer that she and her husband were struggling to communicate during a stressful pregnancy and deployment, and asked if there was support available. The officer was kind, professional, gave her resources, but more importantly, she made a note. Third, she called Yolanda and asked a favor. Yolanda was a nurse. Camille asked her to write down, from a medical standpoint, what the effect of the things Dolores had done could be on a pregnant woman in the third trimester. Not a formal letter, just a record of Yolanda's professional understanding. Yolanda wrote it. Camille added it to her folder. Marcus called twice more that week. The conversations were careful, bruised. He was trying. She could tell he was trying to believe her, but also that it cost him something to consider the possibility that his mother had done these things. Camille understood this and still found it painful. You can understand something and still be hurt by it. The baby was due in 3 weeks. Here is what Camille did not know. She did not know that Marcus, in the days after that call, had been doing something unusual for him. He'd been asking questions. He had called his unit chaplain, not about religion, just because chaplains are trained listeners and because Marcus didn't know who else to call who was outside the situation. He'd told the chaplain what Camille had described. The chaplain had listened and said, "Do you think your wife is someone who invents things?" "No," Marcus said immediately. "Has she lied to you before?" "Never." "Then why don't you believe her now?" Marcus hadn't answered right away. Because the honest answer was, because believing her means my mother is someone I didn't know she was. And that was a grief he wasn't ready for, in the middle of everything else he was carrying. But he'd started to sit with it. He'd started to remember things, the way his mother had spoken about his father after the divorce. Not with anger exactly, but with a quiet rewriting of history, small revisions that always made her the only reasonable party. He'd always accepted this because his father had, objectively, left. But he began to wonder, for the first time, how much of what he knew about his own childhood had been curated. He made a call back home. Not to his mother, to his aunt, his father's sister, a woman named Vera who had always kept a respectful distance from Dolores but had never pretended to like her. He told Vera what Camille had described. There was a pause. "Marcus," Vera said, "I've been waiting for you to call me about your mother for 15 years. She told him things. Not gossip, facts. Events Marcus hadn't known about or hadn't put together. The way Dolores had treated the girlfriend Marcus had in high school. Small campaigns of undermining that only became visible in hindsight. The way she'd managed, twice, to get Marcus transferred away from civilian jobs he'd loved. By raising concerns with people in his chain of command, framed as motherly worry. The way she told Vera at Marcus and Camille's wedding that she gave the marriage maybe 2 years. Marcus sat with his phone long after the call ended. He called Camille that night. "I believe you," he said. Just that. Camille pressed her hand over her mouth. The baby kicked. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry it took me this long." They talked for 2 hours. The longest call of the deployment on a connection that held the whole time, which felt like a small mercy. Camille's daughter was born at Fayetteville Medical Center on a Thursday, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and a look of grave displeasure at the world that her grandmother Loretta said was exactly how Camille had looked at birth. They named her Amara Joy. Marcus wasn't there. He got the call on a 12-hour delay, because of communication restrictions during the operational period, and received the photos of his daughter before he heard Camille's voice. He told her later that those 12 hours, looking at his daughter's face and not being able to reach anyone, were the hardest of the deployment. Dolores sent a text. Just, "Congratulations. I'm sure she's beautiful." Camille read it once and set the phone down. Her mother and sister were there. Yolanda drove up the next day. The room was full of the right people. Camille held Amara and thought about what it meant to protect something that's small and new, and felt a clarity she hadn't felt in months. 3 weeks later, she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. It was a woman named Captain Dana Flores, assigned to the Army's Inspector General office. Camille's file, the notes she had submitted to the family readiness officer, the timeline she had documented, the medical record from Yolanda, had been reviewed as part of a broader review of welfare incidents reported by military spouses during deployment. Captain Flores was thorough and careful. She asked Camille to walk her through everything, beginning to end, and Camille did, from the first kitchen rule to the cold water to the thrown-away package to the call where Marcus hadn't believed her. She read from her notes, the dates precise, the incident specific. Flores was quiet for a moment after Camille finished. "Mrs. Okafor," she said, "you kept very good records." "My mother taught me to document things," Camille said. She wasn't exactly sure what was happening. The Army's interest here wasn't primarily in Dolores. Dolores was a civilian. The interest was in the welfare of a service member's family during deployment, and in whether the support system in place had failed to flag a situation that should have been flagged sooner. There was also, Flores explained carefully, The matter of certain things Dolores had said to Marcus over the course of the deployment that had affected his mental state during operations. Something his chaplain had noted, something his commanding officer had been made aware of. Military families exist inside a structure, she explained. When the structure fails a family, the structure wants to know. What Camille also didn't know yet. Marcus had already spoken to his commanding officer. He had disclosed the situation with his mother and the effect it had on his focus during the last rotation. He had been professional and specific. His CO had taken it seriously. Dolores Okafor found out that something was happening on a Wednesday afternoon in March. She wasn't sure exactly what it was at first. 2 people in uniform had come to the door. Not police, not Army MPs, but from the Inspector General's office, accompanied by a Raleigh PD officer present as a courtesy. They asked if she was Dolores Okafor. They identified themselves and explained they had some questions about her son's deployment period and the welfare of his spouse. She told them she didn't know what they were talking about. They were polite. They were entirely impressively polite. They had a folder. Camille's folder, she understood quickly, because they referenced dates she recognized and incidents she recognized, described with a precision she had not anticipated from a woman she had believed would never organize herself enough to be taken seriously. The visit wasn't an arrest. No crime had been committed in a prosecutable sense. What it was an official record, a formal interview, documentation that would be part of Marcus's permanent record as a family welfare matter. Dolores's statements, made to Marcus over the deployment, that investigators believed had been designed to undermine his wife's credibility, those were part of the record too. They asked her specifically about a package sent by Loretta to Camille that had been disposed of. She said she didn't remember a package. They had a postal confirmation of delivery. She was quiet for a moment. "I may have made a mistake," she said. The officer holding the folder wrote something down. It wasn't justice in the cinematic sense. There was no courtroom, no verdict, no sentence. What there was, a formal record that Dolores Okafor had created an actively harmful home environment for a military spouse during deployment, had withheld information and misrepresented Camille's state to a deployed service member, and had disposed of property belonging to a member of the household. That record existed now. It would follow certain decisions about base housing privileges, family support access, and Marcus's own service record in ways that had not yet been determined. That was enough for now. Marcus came home in May. Camille was at the airport with Amara, who was 6 weeks old and wearing a onesie that said Daddy's Home, which Yolanda had found online and shipped priority mail. Camille had her hair down, which she almost never wore, and was standing near the back of the crowd because she didn't want to be in a rush. She just wanted to see him. She saw him before he saw her. He came through the doors with his uniform rumpled from travel, carrying his duffel, scanning the crowd with that specific alertness that deployed service members carry for a while after they come back. Eyes moving, always a little faster than the situation requires. Then he found her. He crossed the distance between them without rushing but without pausing either, dropped the duffel, and held her for a long time without saying anything. She felt him exhale, a deep, held too long breath going out. The baby, pressed between them, made a small sound. He pulled back and looked at Amara the way men look at things they've seen only in photographs. "Hey," he said softly, to the baby. "Just hey." Amara blinked at him. "She has your eyebrows," he said. "She has your forehead," Camille said. He laughed, that slow laugh she'd fallen in love with at a cookout 3 years ago. She had forgotten. She realized how much she missed that specific sound. Marcus called his mother 2 weeks after he came home. The conversation was long and it was not easy. He told her what he knew, what had been documented, what had been reported. He told her that he believed his wife. He told her what Vera had said, and what the chaplain had said, and what his own memory, reassembled carefully, had told him about patterns he'd chosen not to see. Dolores cried. She denied some things and minimized others. She told him he had always been the most important thing in her life. He said he knew that, and that was part of what made this so hard, because loving someone and damaging the people they loved were not mutually exclusive, and he needed her to understand the damage before anything else could be repaired. There was no dramatic revelation. No confession. She was 61 years old, and the story she had about herself was deeply set, and one conversation wasn't going to rewrite it. He wasn't naive enough to think it would. What he told her was this: his wife and daughter were his family. That wasn't a replacement for her. She was still his mother, and he still loved her, but they came first. If she couldn't be in their lives in a way that was safe, she wouldn't be in their lives in the ways she wanted. That was the line. He'd drawn it. He needed her to know it was real. She was quiet for a long time before she answered. I just didn't want to lose you, she said. Mom, he said. You almost did. They found an apartment, Marcus, Camille, and Amara, in a neighborhood where they didn't know anyone yet, which felt like exactly the right kind of fresh start. They painted the nursery a warm yellow. Marcus assembled the crib twice because he did it wrong the first time and refused to acknowledge it until Camille very gently pointed it out, and he looked at it for 30 seconds and said, Okay, yeah. Camille went back to work at the records office 3 months later, part-time at first. She kept the folder she had assembled, the dates, the notes, Yolanda's letter, all of it, in a file box in the closet. She wasn't sure she'd ever need it again. She was glad she had it. Her mother came to visit often. Deja came once and declared Amara the best-looking baby in their entire family history, which was generous and probably accurate. Yolanda was named godmother at a small ceremony in their apartment, at which Amara slept through the entire thing, which everyone agreed was a good sign about her character. Dolores sent a birthday card when Amara turned 3 months. Then another at 4 months. They were brief, 2 or 3 sentences, careful. Camille read them and didn't respond immediately. Then, one evening in October, she wrote a short note back. Not forgiveness exactly, more like a door left slightly open. She wasn't sure yet if she wanted to open it further. She decided she didn't have to know yet. Some things don't resolve quickly. Some repairs take longer than the damage did. What Camille would say about that year when she eventually talked about it, and she did eventually talk about it, in a support group for military spouses that she found through the family readiness officer who had taken her first call, was that the hardest part wasn't the cold water or the food or even the package. The hardest part was the silence. The way she had turned herself inside out trying not to cause problems, trying not to make things harder for Marcus, trying to hold everything together so calmly that the falling apart went unnoticed. We're trained to be strong, she told the group once. Military spouses especially. You hold the house, you hold the family, you don't burden your deployed partner. And the people who want to take advantage of you know that about you. They count on it. Another woman in the group nodded. She'd had a different situation. Not a mother-in-law, a landlord, a financial problem her husband hadn't known about. But the shape of it was familiar. The silence. The solitary carrying. The fear that asking for help meant failing at the thing you were supposed to be good at. Camille had learned something from those 11 weeks that she carried forward. She called it, privately, the cost of quiet. The price of not saying the thing, not making the call, not writing it down when you should. She thought about the women who had endured longer, said less, had no notes to show and no Yolanda to write a letter. She thought about them more than she talked about them. She started volunteering. Small things at first, answering phones for the military family support line, then eventually doing intake interviews with new spouses when they arrived on post. She was good at it. She knew how to recognize the specific look of someone who was managing something they hadn't told anyone about yet. Marcus, who had spent his career moving toward things without hesitation, watched his wife do this and felt something that took him a while to name. It was pride, yes, but it was also something like awe, at the way she had taken the worst year of her life and turned it into a reason to answer the phone for someone else. He told her this on a Sunday evening when Amara was asleep and they were sitting on the back porch of their apartment, which barely qualified as a porch but held 2 chairs and caught the evening light. He told her he was sorry for the weeks he'd doubted her. He'd said it before, but he said it again because some things deserve to be said more than once. You believed me in the end, she said. I should have believed you first, he said. She looked at him. Yeah, she said. You should have. And she said it without anger, just the plain truth of it, which was the only way she knew how to live now. There is something about a woman who survives quietly that people underestimate. They see the endurance and call it passivity. They see the silence and call it weakness. They don't see the documentation. They don't see the call to the lawyer. They don't see the note to the family readiness officer that planted a seed. They don't see the folder in the box in the closet. Camille had never stopped thinking. Not once. She had been scared and exhausted and isolated and doubted by her own husband, and she had still kept moving. She had done it without dramatic confrontations, without a moment of public triumph, without anyone ever seeing most of what it cost her. She protected her daughter before her daughter was born. She protected her marriage when she could have let it break. She protected her own story by writing it down carefully in the specific language of facts and dates because she understood, in a way she couldn't have articulated before that year but understood completely by the end of it, that the truth needs to be documented or it gets revised. Amara, at 6 months old, had no knowledge of any of this. She knew her mother's voice and her father's hands and the yellow walls of her room. She knew the gray cat who slept near her crib and sometimes regarded her with an air of mild judgment. She knew that when she was hungry, someone came. She knew that when she cried, someone answered. That was everything for now. That was, in the end, the whole point. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to protect yourself quietly, without anyone else knowing the cost? Share your story if you feel comfortable. And if someone in your life is going through something like this, sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply, I believe you. Subscribe to Hill Tales Stories and we'll see you in the next one.